I have to tell you that one of my patients, he's 10 years old, he found out that I was going to be giving a talk. And so he came and he said, "Jen, are you nervous?" And I said, "Man, I'm super nervous, dude." So he just slides a piece of paper across my desk, right? And I open it, and all it says is whip and nay. And so I thought to myself, dude, what's this about? He goes, "Well, here's what I want you to do." And he leans into me and he gets really serious. And he says, "If you get nervous, I just want you to imagine me doing the whip and the nay in the background." And then he goes, "It's the only note card you'll ever need." So I get to work with awesome kids like that every single day. And the kids that I work with are really struggling with a lot of big stuff. They're navigating the heavy waters of depression and anxiety, bipolar disorder, PTSD, psychosis. Oftentimes these kids admit and they've just made a really serious suicide attempt. And I'm really passionate about this subject, and so much so that it gets a little awkward sometimes. So we all know this feeling, right? So the feeling is when we're in the grocery store or there's a coffee shop and we see a friend that we haven't seen in a really long time, right? And we know all social norms tell us that all we can do is say really good things that are happening in our lives, right? Because heaven forbid we mention something that makes someone uncomfortable. And so I usually totally ignore that social norm and do make people uncomfortable. And so it goes like this. We'll be in the grocery store and I'll see someone that I haven't seen in a really long time, and they'll tell me how great everything in their life is going. And I know, okay, you could make something up right now, but instead I launch into this discussion about childhood suicide. And if I'm feeling really sassy, I'll throw out some statistics. I'll say, did you know that suicide is the third leading cause of death for kids ages 10 to 14, and it's the second leading cause of death for kids 15 to 24. And it's about this time that my husband is squeezing my shoulder, like, just stop, right, while you're ahead. And all of a sudden, my friend is clinging their child close to them, and the Bisquick has never been more important, and they need to find it right now. But I don't bring this up because I think that this is a message of despair. I bring it up because I think it's a message of hope. My boss, Chris Bates, one of the things that she always tells me is the only way out is through. So the only way to find this hope is to walk through some murky waters together. And what I find is that my friend in the grocery store, 9 times out of 10, will text me or they'll Facebook me, and they'll say, "My son's really been struggling with depression. Can you help me?" And that tells me that this is a conversation that people are dealing with in isolation and not in community. And so I want to invite you to step into some uncomfortable waters with me so that we can end up on the other side with some hope. So I want to share some unsettling statistics with you. In the United States in 2014, over 42,000 people killed themselves. That's 117 people per day. That's one person every 12 minutes. So statistically speaking, while I'm up here, someone will end their life. We have to decide as a community, are we okay with that? In 2014, 428 children just between the ages of 5 and 14 killed themselves. 5. So on a national level, 8% of high school kids report that they have made a significant suicide attempt 1 or more times in the past 12 months. That's huge. And when we zoom into a local level, into the Montana community, that number jumps to 8.9%, okay? As a matter of fact, Montana always ranks top 5 in the number of highest suicides, and we've ranked there for the past 40 years. So I think we could all agree that if there was a vaccination to prevent this, we would all stack hands on that, right? We would all want our kids to have that. But there's not a vaccination. What clinical research does show us is that there are protective factors, and that the most protective factor we can arm our kids with to prevent suicide is a positive, caring, healthy adult relationship. And now that sounds really simple, but I just have to ask, would the suicide rates continue to climb every year if it was that simple? And so I think we have the opportunity right now to revise the way we build relationships with kids. And the first step in that revision process is knowing that no one's going to do it for us. So let's take a few minutes to talk about just 2 simple revisions that I have seen kids and families make together to build healthier, stronger kids while arming with them with the protection against suicide. Okay? So that first protective factor in revision that I want to talk about is just showing up. Showing up without holding a grudge, and that's the tough part, right? Without holding a grudge. So it's about showing up day after day, whether or not that kid shows up or not. And I gotta tell you, oftentimes they're not going to. Because it's not about the fight that you had last night with your son, your daughter, your niece, your nephew. It's about how you talk about it the next day. And if they don't show up the next day, it's about how you talk about it the day after that, or the day after that, or the day after that, right? It's about showing up over and over. So I want to tell you a story that I think illustrates this idea of showing up and pursuing our kids while also unpacking this second revision that I'd like to propose that we make as a community. So for confidentiality purposes, I'm just going to talk about a patient, and I'm going to call her Susie. So one day last winter, I got a phone call from someone on my unit, and they said, Jen, Susie was at the hospital doors, and we went to go get her, but she just bolted right away. And they said, what should we do? And now, from working with Susie, I know that she is very impulsive, that she has made many suicide plans, she's attempted suicide, and that she gets scared really easily. And so my first reaction was, okay, I'm gonna go after Susie. And so I busted out of the hospital doors, and okay, I think like Eye of the Tiger was playing in my head while I was running, right? Because I was like, yes, I'm gonna go get her, until reality struck, right? And then I realized that this here is not athletic or graceful. And as I said, middle of winter, so I found out quickly that I had to run up an icy hill in heels, in the cold without a jacket. Until very quickly, Eye of the Tiger stopped, right? And it was no longer exciting. And I think that that's often the way our relationships with kids go, right? We want to show up, and at first it's really exciting, but it can get clumsy really, really fast. And if we just keep putting one foot in front of the other, even if it's on that clumsy, icy hill, we're eventually going to get close enough to that kid to either meet them or for them to meet us partway. So I made it up the hill, surprisingly, and I got close enough to Susie. I screamed out her name, and she came bolting towards me. And she gave me a hug, and I said, Susie, what happened? What's going on? And she said, you're the first person to ask that. And that really stung, because that told me that we as adults are missing the opportunities to ask our kids the questions that they're wanting asked. So if we think about ways to build a relationship, there's really 2 paths, okay? There's this first path where you can enter the relationship with judgment, okay? And that is going to drive shame. Now, not only is shame highly correlated with suicide, but it also drives disconnection. And that's the last thing that we want when we're trying to build a relationship, right? So the other option, the other path, is to enter the relationship with understanding and with empathy and honesty and trust. And that grows relationship. That grows healthy relationship. Now, each of these paths, they have an overarching question that aligns with them. So if we ask our kids, what's wrong with you? we're headed down the path of judgment. We're headed down the path of shame and disconnect. But if we take the time to ask our kids, hey, what happened to you? What's going on? We're investing in the time to build that relationship with that child. And so that day, had I asked Susie, what's wrong with you? You're so irresponsible. Why did you run away from school? First of all, I wouldn't have been asking the question in the first place, right? I've already pretty much made up my mind that what's wrong with you? Well, you're irresponsible, right? And I would have shut down the conversation right away. But instead, I was able to say, Susie, what happened today? What's going on? And Susie told me that it had been a really rough day. Susie lives with her grandpa. She doesn't have a mom, and her grandpa's health isn't doing so well. And so she was up all night crying and worried about her grandpa's health, okay? And so the next morning she woke up, she had mascara running down her cheeks from the night before, and her hair was a mess, but she woke up late, and so she didn't have time to fix any of that. She showed up to school, and some girls started making fun of her. They started calling her some really nasty names. And she said, Jen, I was going to fight back. I was going to call them those nasty names back. But instead, I went to find my teacher to talk to her. But my teacher was busy. My teacher was in a class. And so I ran to find you guys to talk about it. Now, when we frame it that way, Susie doesn't sound so irresponsible. That actually sounds incredibly adaptive to me, right? That Susie was able to go seek the help that she needed in order to talk about what was going on in her life. But we have to ask what happened in order to get there. And so I think that that's where the hope lies. We know that the hope lies in building these relationships, but we have to revise the way that we're building them. Otherwise, these statistics are going to continue to climb. And so the hope really lies in revising the relationship to show up without a grudge and to ask the right questions. Because it would be phenomenal if there was a vaccine to prevent childhood suicide. I would be one of the first nurses to set up a clinic to want to get that going, but there's not. But my question to us is, what if that prevention has been within each and every one of us all along? Thanks.